Welcome back. In this module, we'll be discussing about preparing for community engagement. The learning objective of this module is to identify relevant stakeholders and target audiences for engagement. It is important for you to understand who are the people that have interest in the engagement you are trying to work on. It is also important to understand people that will benefit directly from this community engagement effort, or people that have direct effects on the outcome of your community engagement effort. Who are stakeholders? Stakeholders are generally said to have an interest in an effort based on whether they can affect or be affected by it. These stakeholders are individuals, groups, organizations, or entities that have an interest, involvement, or influence in a particular project, initiative, or community. Below are the examples of stakeholders. Stakeholders could be community members, they could be local organizations, they could be government agencies within that community. They could be local enterprises, people that are having business entities within that community. They could be educational institutions. They could be youth and elderly groups. They could be media. They could be experts and researchers. They could be special interest groups or faith-based organizations. Let's talk about characterizing stakeholders. Stakeholders can be characterized into three categories. We have the primary stakeholders, secondary stakeholders, and the key stakeholders. These primary stakeholders, they are people that are directly affected by your community engagement efforts, either positively or negatively. So it is important to identify this group of people. Who are the people that will be affected by your community engagement? Who are the people that will benefit from your community engagement? Who are the people that your community engagement will affect directly? These are primary stakeholders. While secondary stakeholders are people or groups that are indirectly affected, either negatively or positively, by your community engagement efforts. The key stakeholders, which are the last category of stakeholders, might belong to either the primary stakeholder group or the secondary stakeholder group. And many times they may stand alone and not belong to any of the two groups above. They are people that can have effect. Remember that primary stakeholders are affected. Primaries and secondary stakeholders are people that are affected, either directly or indirectly, whereas key stakeholders have effect on the community engagement effort. These people, they have a way they shape the direction of your community engagement effort. I have mentioned earlier the examples of community, the stakeholders, when I was talking about who the stakeholders are. Now, grouping these examples, the media and the government agencies falls under key stakeholders because they may have effect on your community engagement effort. For example, you want to go into a community to carry out a certain initiative. Let's use the election campaign, for example. If you approach a community, there are some people in that community that you need to get their buy-ins before you be able to carry out the community engagement initiative. So these people are key stakeholders. They fall under key stakeholders. They could be head of the community. They could be government agencies within that community. Whereas primary stakeholders could be the youth you want to approach, the youth you want to encourage, or the youth you want to designed a campaign for. Secondary stakeholders could be the parents of these youths. It could be the partners of these youths. It could be the bosses of these youths. So it is important to understand which category these people belong to so that you'll be able to approach them, you'll be able to engage them accordingly. Let's talk about target audiences. Target audiences are specific groups or entities that a communication, message, or initiative is aimed at reaching and engaging. I used the campaign program as an example earlier. And if we are to check the campaign program, the young people you want to engage, the young people you want to encourage to vote, or any other individuals you want to encourage to vote are your target audience, because they are the people your initiative is aimed at. You want to reach them, you want to engage them. If your community engagement is about informing or is about consultation, that means these are the people you need to focus on as your target audience. You need to start thinking about how to categorize these people. Sometimes your target audience might fall under primary stakeholders. Yeah, you might find some of your primary stakeholders under your target audience. Sometimes the stakeholders, they overlap. You could see some target audience under primary stakeholders because these target audiences, they are the people that will also benefit from this community engagement. They will be directly affected by the community engagement efforts. So let's look at examples of target audiences. We have the community residents, we have the youth, we have the elderly population, we have the parents and families. Depending on the kind of effort your community engagement is aiming at, you could see that we have government officials here under target audiences. And we also have government officials falling under the key stakeholders. It depends on your community engagement effort. If your community engagement effort is targeting government officials, then government officials falls under your target audience. If government officials are one of the key stakeholders in your community engagement effort, that means they will still belong to the key stakeholders category. So that is why I said sometimes stakeholders and target audiences overlap depending on the efforts your community engagement is aiming at. So let's look at importance of identifying stakeholders. When you identify stakeholders, it allows you to make informed decisions. It also allows you to have effective communication strategies because you have already identified them, you have already understood where they stand. Then this will help you to design communication strategies that will be effective. Also, when you identify stakeholders, you'll be able to allocate your resources effectively because you will know where to direct your whatever you are doing, your efforts or other things within your community engagement efforts. When you identify stakeholders, you will also be able to get support. So for example, you've been able to get the buy-ins of the key stakeholders or the secondary stakeholders within that community. These people will help to support your initiative. They will give you that backup. They will allow you to carry out your community engagement and you'll be able to get the desired outcomes from your community engagement efforts. It also helps to tailor engagement strategies, just like how I've mentioned under effective communication. When you understand your stakeholders, you identify your stakeholders, it will help you to tailor how to engage them. So there are some people you will engage physically. There may be some people you can engage virtually because you already identified who your stakeholders are. You know your primary stakeholders, they are young people. Using the campaign program, for example, they are young people. That means you know that young people can be engaged virtually using technology. Whereas the secondary stakeholders, maybe they are the parents, the association heads, or the business owners in that community. You know that you may not necessarily get them to attend a virtual meeting. That means you may look at conducting a town hall meeting with them. So when you identify your stakeholders, you are able to categorize them into primary stakeholders, secondary stakeholders, and key stakeholders. It will open your minds towards different engagement strategies you can plot to help you engage them effectively. It also enhances impact because if you don't even know who your stakeholders are or who your target audiences are, you may not be able to get a good outcome from your community engagement efforts. So I've mentioned outcomes, so sustainable outcome and other importance of identifying stakeholders. Now let's look at the techniques for identifying stakeholders. Techniques for identifying stakeholders. We know the importance of identifying stakeholders. We know that stakeholders, they are people that have interest in whatever community engagement efforts you want to carry out. They could belong to the category of primary stakeholders, secondary stakeholders, or key stakeholders. Now you have understood that, then you need to know how to identify these stakeholders. What are the techniques to identify these stakeholders? We have brainstorming. So when you want to identify your stakeholders, let's say you are trying to prepare for your community engagement. You want to know community A, we want to engage community A on European Parliament election campaign that is coming up. We want to engage community A. Who are our potential stakeholders? Okay, you need to, you may want to gather a team, maybe your team members or other people that are working with you on that initiative. You may want to gather these people to brainstorm and map out. You'll be amazed to see how you will be able to come up with list of potential stakeholders. That means people that will be affected directly or indirectly by your community engagement efforts. Remember, this effect could be positive or negative. So you need to think so wide, and when you are able to brainstorm, you'll be able to come up with different stakeholders. So for example, you have your team with you. You are able to list these stakeholders. From there, you'll be able to engage them. But if you don't know how to even identify these stakeholders, you may want to have challenge in executing your community engagement initiative or project. So the first is you can brainstorm. You can gather a team to brainstorm and list potential stakeholders. You need to consider all individuals and groups who might be affected by or interested in the initiative. You may want to also use surveys and questionnaires. So you may go into the community and do some sort of survey, ask people questions, ask about their roles in the community, their interests, in the project you want to embark on, or the community engagement initiative you want to embark on, and also get to know how they can be involved. So these questionnaires or surveys will help you to know who to turn to as regards your community engagement efforts. You also may want to conduct interviews. So interviews and focus groups is very important, because when you conduct interviews or focus group discussion, you'll be able to gather insights from people's response, from people's contribution. You'll be able to say, okay, this individual A will be good for this aspect of our community engagement. From that insight, it will help you to better plan for your community engagement efforts. You could decide to use virtual interviews or physical interviews. You can decide to use focus group discussion virtual, or you go for a physical focus group discussion where you gather people and you get to talk to them, and from there you get to gather insights from whatever their contribution is. You can also conduct review on documents. You can review documents. You can go to maybe the community library, or you can visit their local government council to get reports. You get reports, check the database to identify organizations, maybe organizations that are working within that community. Or it could be organizations that has worked on a similar initiative before, or organizations that are connected, that may be connected to that initiative in one way or the other. You can also use public records. You can decide to check public records for you to get to identify the individuals that are relevant to your initiative. Now, all these techniques depends on your community engagement effort. You may want to consider using 2 or 3 techniques. You may want to consider using all the techniques. You may even get to you may even get what you need from maybe just 2 techniques. You can also make use of networking and consultation. You can consult with your colleagues or peers that have done something similar, and you can never tell from their knowledge, from their lessons. You will learn 1 or 2 things, and it will better shape the community engagement you are preparing for. You can also leverage on community engagement events. You can attend some of their events, and as well host events. You can decide to attend events and get to meet some of these individuals groups, or host events where you can call on community members to share their perspective on the community engagement efforts. We also have social media and online platforms. I've talked about that briefly. You could use social media. You could use social media to identify active community members and influencers. Sometimes when you are trying to engage a community, you don't even know the kind of people in that community. But when you are able to go into social media platforms, and check through that community, you could get to meet organizations that have worked in that community before. So by connecting with this organization, you'll be able to learn more about what they have done and how they've been able to do that. And from there, you'll be able to get insights. You'll be able to get insights and also get to know how interested these community members would be in the community engagement effort you are trying to prepare for. So you could also review past projects like I've mentioned. You can get to know the past projects and see how it's relevant to the initiative you are planning for. We also have advisory groups and feedback mechanism. You can use all these techniques to get to identify the stakeholders. Remember that we have 3 categories of stakeholders. We have the primary stakeholders, we have the secondary stakeholders, and the key stakeholders. These stakeholders are very important in shaping the outcome of your community engagement efforts. So it is important for you to identify them so that you are able to engage them, get their buy-ins before you embark on your community project efforts.